Hello, and welcome to The Black Unconscious,
a mental health podcast about living, coping, and thriving while Black.
I'm Raquel Martin, a PhD candidate in medical and clinical psychology.
And I'm Dr. Justin Hopkins, a licensed clinical psychologist.
This podcast is not meant to be a substitute for a therapeutic relationship with a licensed therapist.
Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to The Black Unconscious. I am Raquel Martin.
And I am Dr. Justin Hopkins.
And today we are going to be talking about depression and oppression.
Absolutely. So today, the title of the episode is Oppression and Depression 101. That's Oppression and Depression 101. And so this is going to be more of a baseline introduction into oppression, but we'll also be getting into how the unique aspects of the Black experience can lead one to feel more depressed. We think that's a really important connection to make.
Yeah, and one of the main reasons why we decided to start with depression is because it is such a common mental health disorder.
Right.
And I know you always have statistics.
Absolutely. So it's one of the most common mental health disorders there are. In 2017, about 16.2 million adults in the United States had at least one major depressive episode, and that number represents about 6.7% of all U.S. adults. And the prevalence of major depressive episode is even higher among adult females, about 8.5% compared to males at 4.8%. And so it's a very, very common disorder. And one statistic that we've cited on this show before is just that only about 41% of those people are actually getting help. And that's a really, really low number. And so it leaves a lot of people who deal with these kind of disorder and do not get the help that they need.
Yeah, and it's a problem, definitely. I think one of the biggest things that I want to drive home during this episode is the criteria to be diagnosed with depression. So, of course, everyone thinks about the depressed mood and everything like that, but there are so many other contributing factors to being diagnosed with depression. So there is something that has to do with eating habits. So whether your eating has changed, whether you're eating more or eating less, that can be a criteria of depression. Your sleep changing, and not just the amount of sleep that you're getting. I think it's important to realize that it's not just getting 8 hours versus 7 hours versus 6 hours. It can be you waking up more than you used to. So instead of sleeping straight through from, 12 o'clock to 8 o'clock a.m., you woke up 4 times between 12 o'clock, 8 o'clock a.m. That's a change in your sleep. Or the quality of sleep is really important. You could be waking up and used to feel rested, but you don't feel rested anymore. A really, really big thing is getting loss of pleasure and things that you used to enjoy.
Right.
Things that you used to enjoy. So if you used to enjoy watching the games, you don't like watching a game no more. Or you used to enjoy, Netflix videos, but now you don't. Attention and focus is a big aspect of depression diagnosis. Like you're not being able to concentrate anymore, feeling fatigue, having loss of energy, morbid thoughts and thoughts of death, and of course the depressed mood. And then They technically call it like psychomotor agitation or retardation, but it's moving around a lot more and moving around a lot less. So the way I would normally do it, if a patient came in and they tell me they're coming to him for no reason, like my wife made me come in or my parent made me come in or something like that, and I don't, there's nothing wrong with me, and I'm like, all right, so tell me what brings you in. And they're like, oh, they just told me to come in, and I'm like, okay, so tell me about your normal day. Like, how much do you sleep? Oh, I sleep 7 hours. And I'm like, oh, you feel rested when you wake up? No. You always used to sleep 7 hours? I used to sleep 9 hours, but I only sleep 7 now. So okay, so that's a change from the norm. And like, what do you do for fun? I mean, I used to play basketball, but I don't really like doing basketball no more. I kind of just stopped doing it. Any reason? No, I just ain't really feeling it no more. Mm-hmm. That's a loss of pleasure in something.
Right.
And also you're working out less. So as most people know, working out helps to release endorphins, which makes you feel better. So not only do you have a loss of pleasure in something, you're also not doing something that helps you to balance out more. Right. And then it's like, okay, so who do you hang out with? Do you have a lot of friends you hang out with? I mean, I do, but now when I hang out with them, I kind of feel like I'm not really in the room. Like I'm not really having attention. It's really hard for me to stay on task. That's the loss of concentration and attention. So you got a person who came in, there was no problem, nothing's wrong, and then even after just talking to them, we just clicked off like 3 symptoms right there. Like your sleep is the same amount of hours, but the quality is less. You don't take pleasure in as much stuff. It's harder for you to concentrate on things you used to enjoy. That's depression.
Yeah, I really, really like those examples because it points out how it's so hard to like pick up on some of the symptoms sometimes. Because we just think of, well, in terms of our mood, and like and then basically, do I feel depressed or no? Yes or no. Like that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on your answer, it'll determine whether you think that you are depressed or not. And what we really want to get through to everyone is that we're not entirely aware of all of the experiences that we're having all the time. So some of these things can be really, really subtle or unbeknownst to us. And that's why some of the observations from other people, whether it be a friend, trusted colleague, or family member, may have some better insight than you just observing for yourself and determining what kind of mood that you're in. And that can be helpful.
As well as, so some people may confuse like depressed versus I'm feeling sad, which is a huge difference, right? Like everyone has sad moments, but then depression is different because there's always a range of emotions. Right. I do think affect identification is really important because there's a difference between happy and ecstatic. There's a difference between sad and depressed.
Right.
And that's really important to understand.
Absolutely. Every single human emotion is on a spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. Anger, rage, frustration, annoyed, disappointment, upset, sadness. I think all emotions are related to one another, but the ones that are even more related, the ones that are more similar, they remain on the spectrum kind of close to each other. So sadness and depression being on the same spectrum and being really close to one another on that spectrum, it can be hard to differentiate between the two, but I think one of the things that really does help to differentiate is that, Raquel, as you were saying, we get sad over life events that happen that are really unfortunate, whether that be a funeral, the loss of a loved one or a friend or a colleague, someone that an unfortunate event at work, getting feedback from someone that you didn't enjoy. Those kind of things can bring sadness. But depression is this more chronic, unreleasing kind of feeling that sustains for a longer period of time. And so one of the criteria, part of the criteria, Raquel, you mentioned the symptoms, but then the time frame is also really, really important. So of the symptoms that you mentioned, which I'll repeat just really quickly, just the depressed mood, the loss of pleasure, which is also called anhedonia, significant weight loss or weight gain, significant changes in sleep, whether it be more or less, the psychomotor agitation, which it could be slowing down, the fatigue or loss of energy every day, the feelings of worthlessness, diminished ability to concentrate, or recurrent thoughts of death. If you experience any one of those, any 5 of those, and at least out of the 5, at least one of them has to be either depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure.
Yeah, because it's called depression.
Right. Right. So it has to be you would have to have one of those. So it is possible to have a depression without the stated depressed mood, but if you have the loss of interest and pleasure or these feelings of hopelessness or worthlessness, then you would still be classified as having a depressive episode.
And that's why it's so hard, in my opinion, for people to pick up on it, because I will always say, your mental health, your health, everything, it's a fingerprint. So just because my depression has me having morbid thoughts or having fatigue and stuff like that, someone else's depression can be on a different level where they're having, and there's a range of depression too. So there's a range in the extent to it. Right. I think another important thing when it comes to depression versus sadness is sadness is, you just saw Michael B. Jordan, that picture with him with his girlfriend, so that's sad, everyone is, we all sad about that. Depression is a lot of people think that you can't go into depression because of things, I don't know, that you may see as smaller, but depression changes your aspect of thinking. It's a chronic issue, so it changes the way you think, it changes the way you act, it changes the way you behave.
Yes, right.
That's why it's depression. It's not just being sadness over one specific thing, and it's not an emotional state that goes back and forth. It's something that sticks with you because it's chronic versus the acute aspect. So it's important to realize that you not only are you feeling down and depressed mood about it, this has affected every single aspect of your thinking, of your perception of things, of your behaviors. Because like I said in the example, you're feeling depressed and you're not hanging out with people anymore. You can't even focus when you're hanging out with your friends. You're not doing basketball because you're so depressed. You're in that state. Right. That it has changed your behaviors. Right.
I think that's a hallmark of any sort of behavioral health issue, is that it impacts other aspects of your life. It can impair you socially, occupationally, in terms of things that you do for your family. So it really does encompass more than just a brief moment or a couple of instances.
Yeah.
But one thing I did want to clarify again, I'm not sure if I did, but of the symptoms that we mentioned, like 5, you would have to have at least 5 or more of one of 2 being the depressed mood or loss of interest for at least 2 weeks.
For major depression.
Because
there are,
there are other.
I don't want to call it baby depression, but it's not.
There are other yes, that's a really. So there's something called major depressive disorder, and there's a mild, moderate, and severe for those. For that diagnosis, which is the most common. But then there's also something called dysthymia, which is technically, they say it could be a lower grade depression, but you felt it for longer than 2 years, for 2 years or longer. And so that is also, and then there are other diagnoses. Our diagnostic manual is not perfect. So there are a lot of other diagnoses that try to be more of a catch-all, because it's very clear when you're in pain, you're in pain. When you're feeling something that's really as devastating as depression or anxiety or any other disorder that we'll hopefully talk about at some point on the show, it really does impact you in a lot of different ways, but it can be hard to capture all of those ways within a diagnostic criteria because humans are so different and complicated. So we have these things called adjustment disorder, depression or anxiety not otherwise specified. There are disorders that there are these diagnostic criteria, these diagnostic labels that also include lower grades of any sort of emotional pain that I think one can experience. A psychology professor used to tell me, if you look hard enough at the DSM, you could pretty much pick out any sort of thing, and you're likely to have at least one.
Yeah, because there's also depressive episodes, and it's also the fact that with the DSM, just to bring it back to us, it's culturally biased, right? The one aspect to think that we're definitely going to talk about today is the fact that, like, culturally, depression can look different according to your culture. It can look different according to male versus female. It can, think about how many people in a space, we talk all the time about how rare it is to have minority clinicians. Think about how rare it is to have females versus males. In psychology, there are females, there are more females than males. Just honestly, just having you on the podcast is a rarity, because there are not many, male psychologists, let alone Black male psychologists.
Right.
So the people who are coming together to make this book, this big book that chooses how you are diagnosed, that chooses how our insurance covers us and stuff like that, it's a culturally biased aspect. So what are some of the things that you think, when it comes to depression, you look at different culturally?
So, you were talking about one of the differences between, like, sadness and depression.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I think for depression, I think it's this thought of, like, I am bad, I am wrong. With sadness, again, it's like you're reacting to something on the outside, but depression is, like, turned inward. There's this introjective kind of way depression manifests, because you're evaluating yourself in this way that's really, really negative. And it's not just as simple as having a belief or a thought about it, but there's conviction. There's experience of oneself as being wrong and bad. And I think as Black people, there's a political and social cultural zeitgeist that, like, lends itself for us to not feel as great about ourselves.
I definitely agree with that. Especially, that's the oppression piece, of the episode, right? Like, it's stressful, of course, to be just a minority in America, but also to feel oppressed, like, to feel down. If someone keeps pushing you down long enough, you're gonna stay down. And if we're in a society where we're seeing so many people, whether it's in media, being pushed down and kicked down, or whether it's at home, or whether it's at work, eventually you're gonna stay down.
Right.
And to me, that's that's how it is with society, and that's how it is when it comes down to connecting it specifically with African Americans. Like, the aspect of oppression, it's all around us. This is a systemic issue, period. Whether you're surrounded by Black people, whether you're in DC, Baltimore, Chicago, no matter what, like, there's some aspect of oppression that you see, and that can make you depressed.
Right. Well, I think also, absolutely. And I think, like, we know that we live in a society that cultivates Black invalidation. Like, period. We know that. And I think oftentimes that invalidation gets internalized because it's all around us. It's the books that we read. It's the educational system that we're in. It's the It's our political structure from the top down. It is the messages that we receive on TV. It's the lack of representation in all things that represent success and wealth and forward thinking and upward mobility and just self-fulfillment. All of these things kind of collectively tell us, well, like we're not as good as, or we're not as hardworking as, or we're not as worthy as. And I think depending on how those messages are corroborated in your personal everyday experiences, you could see how that level of invalidation on so many different levels could lead one to feel like there's something uniquely wrong with them. And I think that kind of, in many ways, can connect the dots for someone who's going through depression that also has to be that also happens to be a person of color. You know, we mentioned in our first episode that people of color are more likely to express feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness, and that's a national statistic. And so when you see that kind of information, it gets you wondering, well, why is that? You know, mm-hmm. and I think it is part of the cultural experience of being Black in America, and the level of invalidation that comes with being a person of color in this society. You can't help but imagine how that impacts someone's mental.
Yeah, and I want to take it on a gender level as well. So I'll do the woman part, you do the male part, you know, clearly. But as a Black female, when it comes to the depression aspect, it also comes to representation. To me, it comes to seeing if I'm seeing a certain number of Black women in high achieving fields. And a lot of times we quantify achievement with money, right? It's unfortunate. There's so many more levels to it, which we can talk about later, but we look at money. So how many Black females do I see in high achieving fields? How many Black females do I see being able to stand up for themselves? It can also come down to any aspect of being blown off in relationships, like how it's invalidating sometimes to hear, like if I'm trying to explain myself about something, or someone could just be like, oh, you know, she crazy. That's invalidating. That's upsetting. And as a female, as a Black female in America, just being told that either we're like, you know, too angry or snapping our necks, or, you know, saying that we're speaking up too much. And then, you know, when it comes down to it, not only are we supposed to not speak up too much, but we're also supposed to be like this, you know, superwoman aspect where we're supposed to take care of ourselves, our men, our kids, you know, look like a movie star, you know, cook like somebody's mama, but still, like, you know, bust it over like someone's mistress. Like it's a lot.
And at the same time, I think told to make it look easy.
It's supposed to be easy,
and it
right?
shouldn't be a struggle,
no.
Right? That's also the message. So not only is there like this high expectation, but then there's an invalidation of the effort that you put in.
Yeah. So what about the Black male aspect, when there's some things that you would be like, man, that would you know, depress me as a Black male?
Well, you know what's so interesting? I don't think it's all that different, but I do think it manifests differently, because I think, right, for a lot of Black women, and you talk about that like Black superwoman structure, this idea that you're supposed to be everything all the time to everyone. Mm-hmm. I think for a lot of Black men, they're often reared to think like they're not supposed to be impacted by anything bad that happens to them. That they're supposed to be strong, quote unquote, enough, resilient enough, tough enough to just not let things are supposed to roll off your shoulder, right? I think that is the expectation. So there's this implication of toughness on both sides. And I think right, like you're saying, like you're supposed to do all of these things, do them well, and then not try. And I think for Black men, we're just supposed to like never ever be hurt. Like that's like no matter what. Like it's on us to do better. And you know, some of the ways it comes out. Well, first let me say this. I think invalidation is the number one thing that breeds depression.
Okay.
I do. I think feeling, and I'd like to hear your point on this too, but I think it is literally crazy making. I know I'm using the C word.
The C word.
I think it's crazy making to be treated the way that you are in your life, right? For people to treat you a certain way, to mistreat you, abuse you, tell you messages that are really shaming, and then for the surrounding public, friends included, to tell you, hey, it's not that big of a deal.
it makes no freaking sense because
Right.
it is that big of a
Because it is.
deal.
Right, but I think we also have that expectation of ourselves that we're supposed to like get over it.
Yeah, and that's honestly, that's what makes it so hard when I believe where you know, I do understand, I try to understand the male side when it comes to like, oh, we want you to communicate more and we want you to, you know, use your words more when it comes to emotion. It's like, I didn't learn how to do this. Like, my dad don't talk like that, my granddad don't talk like that, and I've been told not to talk like that. And you mean to tell me now you're just saying, oh, just tell me about all your emotions.
Yeah.
It's like, ma'am, the only emotions I know are sad, angry, happy, hungry.
Right.
Done. So, and then you want me to, it's harder to,
Right.
I think for
Right.
males to get down to that level. That's where I think especially when it comes to black males, when it's the whole struggle of like, don't cry. You're not supposed to cry about this stuff.
Yes.
Don't talk. You know, you don't
Right.
like to talk. All you got to
Right.
do as a black man is just like keep it together. You know, pay the bills and just keep it all in. But
And
then
how-
you see people getting shot on TV, or you see,
Right. Right.
you know, getting invalidated. It's like it's absurd to expect black males to be that way.
It's absurd to expect anybody, right?
Yeah.
No human can just like tough it through every single thing that they experience because you're a human, and when humans feel things, they have reactions to them, and you deal with it, right? Like things, not every single thing is going to impact every single person differently, but yes, as a black man, seeing other black men get murdered for seemingly no reason, and see all of these images of us in these terrible situations, struggling, fighting for our lives, fighting for rights that we're told, that we continue to be told, like, and lied to over and over that we have. Yes, of course that wears on us.
Yeah.
But we're supposed to, like, it's not supposed to affect our performance. It's not supposed to affect like what happens at home. It's not supposed to affect us.
It's not supposed to affect how you engage with people of the other race. It's not
Sure,
supposed to make you look
sure.
at people differently.
Sure.
We're just supposed to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, you
Right.
know, because, you know, slavery's
Well,
been over
exactly.
for so long.
Exactly.
You know, and it's not like there's any systemic things in place
Right.
that would make you feel depressed. To me, I think the biggest thing that contributes to depression is feeling like I have nowhere to go. So feeling like there's no way for me to grow. There's no aspect of growth. Like that's the definition of hopelessness. Like, and just a little side note with science. So I did animal research or whatever, and the way you test hopelessness in rats in particular is, it sounds awful, but you put them in like this tub of water or whatever, and they keep, you know, swimming and stuff like that. Because if you're trying to stay afloat, you're gonna keep swimming, right? You're gonna keep moving around. Hopelessness is when they stop.
Yeah.
It's when they like, all right, this is how it is. And even people can connect this to themselves in their lives. Like, have you had a time when you just kept fighting against something, you kept trying to do it, and then you know what, I'm done. I'm not even gonna try no more.
Yeah.
This is it. That's like, you don't feel like you can grow, you giving up. When I can see when I'm getting into like a really, really like down aspect, it's when I feel like I have nowhere to go.
Yeah, you know, well, worthlessness and hopelessness, right? And again, those are ones that are more, you know, black folks are more likely to endorse feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness, right?
Especially with work, because I think a lot of people do this, but I do think a lot of times, especially with black men, because a lot of black men, no matter what, women too, but I've noticed this a lot with black men. You get asked it's most of the time two questions, like, where are you from and what do you do? So if it comes to career and you don't see people up where they need to, you know, higher up and stuff like that, like your career aspect, that can be a huge contributor to feeling depressed. Because I think women get asked that too, but just being around women and men it's just like, oh, where are you from, what you do? Because you it's really attributed to like, how much can you bring into the household, how much are you really contributing? It's your career.
I think there is a gender norm in there in terms of yes, both perhaps like the intrigue and the fascination with what a man does. Although I mean, obviously, I think any of these things could be like flipped on their head and turned on the other side.
Yeah, I think it's for women too. I've noticed it a lot with men, and even with seeing men get kind of down on themselves and stuff like that. A lot of times, it's like it can be a career aspect.
Well, I think that's true. I think, you know, everyone wants to make something of themselves, right? And for some people, like that is harder for them than others. Like, if you're more privileged, it is easier to make something of yourself than it is if you are less privileged. That just is.
If you're starting off from an income, what does the chump always say? Like, oh, I got a small $1 million loan or whatever.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, it's like, oh, I pulled myself up from my bootstraps. You know, the resources are different. So it's just, I can understand why that can be upsetting. I just call him the chump now.
Right. Well, it is relative, right? I'm sure $1 million was small to him, but it's certainly not to like the average person, right? He's in the top 1% of the world, and so that's
Making
obviously not
decisions for the
small to
whole
anybody
100%.
else. The problem is when he says that amount is small with no kind of understanding of how large that is to everyone else.
Yeah, that's the one thing.
And the stuff that people go through in order to make a living for themselves. So that the struggle aspect, right, the suffering aspect, again, is invalidated. And, and I think America has this norm of just whiting out Black oppression and pain and attributing Black pain solely on Black people. It's like it's exactly what you said. It's like this pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. So what, you don't know your heritage. So what, you like your people were enslaved for hundreds of years. There were decades of Jim Crow law. There were efforts for upward mobility that were and for us to participate more in American democracy that were destroyed. We were deterred to vote. We were claimed to be 3/5 of a human. Black Wall Street was destroyed. The prison industrial complex continues, and it's like, and our families are destabilized, and it's like, so what? Like, any of this is happening?
Yeah.
Like, you need to get a good job. You need to make sure that you're contributing to society in a certain way. But it's like, but hold on. Like, there's this experience, I think, for us in this country of being perpetually gaslighted.
It's ridiculous because it's like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I'm like, we ain't even got boots, dog. Like, What are you talking about? When did you get boots?
Right.
I didn't get boots. You're like,
Right.
we don't have the boots.
Right.
So let's start there. Like, where did you get these boots from?
Right.
Oh, generationally, like these boots have been passed down. And the boots are the income. The boots are the progress. The boots are the, giving us notification about like education we need to do. The boots are the being like, oh, go do this route for this career, invest your money this way. We don't have the boots. So
a lot of us don't. And some of us are privileged enough to be in situations where we're financially capable, right? Like some of us, or whatever those boots may be, right?
Yeah, because I consider myself to be privileged as like someone educated.
Likewise. We both had the privilege of education, going into higher education, right? But you're so right. Like, depending on what those boots are, whether those boots be emotional intelligence, academic achievement, financial comfort, whatever those boots are, I think you just can't overlook the fact that there is suffering, because when you overlook the pain, when you invalidate the pain that has been caused and the pressure that remains on Black lives to not make any mistakes, to be as perfect as you can, to do everything the right way, to try to account for the deficit that has been passed on from generation to generation because of legalized oppression, the deprivilege that comes with being a person of color. Like, if we don't acknowledge that, then the person in pain becomes the problem. Then you're saying, well, it's just them. And I think that that's very much connected to depression. When you're convinced that the person, like, there's something wrong with the person, and I think America just really tries to white out like Black pain.
They try to do that a lot, and it's also the contribute. I totally understand. So what do we do about this if we're feeling this way? Like,
so before we go into that, I want to give one extra example.
All right,
just
but
one.
Darn well we're supposed to stay.
I know.
time.
I know we are. So, just quick, I want to say, like, just as an example.
You sound like you're trying to convince yourself it's going to be quick as well.
I am a little bit. You're right.
All right,
about
1, 2, 3, go.
Okay, so I think one example is like when you have a discussion about like police brutality and like Black on Black violence is brought up. Like, I really don't understand like how those two exist in the same space. And and some people like believe like, what they'll say is that, we can't expect respect if we don't respect ourselves. There's something called respectability politics, right? If you pull your pants up, dress a certain way, then you will be respected.
And it's false for us.
That's
not how it is for us, because
right?
you can do the exact right thing.
Yeah, that's not
you
true.
have people getting stopped because Sandra Bland was on her way to start her career at Prairie View. Yeah. That's an academic person. You can have people who are basketball players. You can have people who are lawyers. Johnny Cochran got stopped by cops during I remember seeing on People vs. OJ, but he got stopped by cops. There is no it's not a thing for us. So it's the biggest lie that we get told. Honestly,
Yes.
it's the biggest lie that we get told.
It is. But that lie also wipes out the fact that it's not all on us, and there's a precedent for us to be oppressed. And you just cannot have a conversation about Black experience without talking about Black pain. So you're talking about, like, when the conversation about police brutality is brought up, yes, Black on Black violence is a thing, but so is white on white violence. But white on white violence isn't just a thing because white aggression is normal. It's normal as a human to have a varying range of aggression, right? In all cultures, like, every culture kills within its culture at similar rates, because people murder who they know. People get into feuds. People get into intense battles, and that sort of things happen. And
that got dark real quick, Justin.
I know. But just to bring it back on point, though, right?
All right.
Just to bring it back on point.
Like what you did there.
So just to bring it back on point, there's nothing specifically unique about Black folk, about Black criminality, right?
No.
And even if Black people didn't commit crimes, like, would that erase how we've been oppressed? Like, I don't.
No, it wouldn't. And the only thing that's unique about it is how much it gets highlighted. Because I was just talking to my friends about, like, the whole marijuana industry right now, and how it's really hard as a Black person to get into this industry. It's not hard as a Black person to get into prison for it. So you have so many people who are in prison for this,
right?
And then you have other people who are, making millions upon millions off of something that we have been oppressed for so long, for weed. But then now we got, like, THC, we got oils, we got stuff that it's ridiculous. I don't want to get off topic, but, like, okay, it's absurd.
It is. But I think there's like there is this often this imbalance of onus, and I think there's nothing wrong with talking about, for us, like, what we can do better to improve our community, because there are plenty of things that everyone should do that everyone can do to make their living circumstances a little bit better, right? And everyone can always do their part in making their life better, whether that means coming to therapy, and we're going to get into this some more, or other things that you can do to better take care of yourself. But I just think it's also important when it comes to depression, that anger that we have in ourselves. Depression is anger turned inward, is a saying that's often shared, and I think we have to do a better job of I think it's useful to be able to balance the direction of where that anger is turned, especially when you're dealing with depression. Finding anger with yourself, or is it always that? Because sometimes the narrative gets changed to Black folks are the reason why Black folks are where they are. I think my point is just that there's a level of, like, invalidation that can lead to depression. It's a huge part of depression, and so
I agree.
With that, why don't we transition into how do we work with depression?
I always say that it's definitely knowing the warning signs about, like, what's going on with you. It's all about that mind-body connection, because a lot of times you don't even identify, like, what has changed within your body. You don't realize that you've been eating more until your pants don't fit. You don't realize you've been sleeping less until you finally take a look in the mirror and you look like you got garbage bags under your eyes. You don't really realize that you haven't been hanging out with your friends or been present with your friends till somebody be like, hey, dude, like, you don't really show up no more.
Yeah.
You stopped playing ball with us. You ain't coming to the Y to play ball with us.
Yeah.
You don't remember when I invited you to this event and you didn't come? No, because I wasn't listening, because I've been tuning out. Like, So really acknowledging the signs, and if you want to see a professional, see a professional. Because when someone comes into me about symptoms, like, I just sit down, chill with them, and be like, so what? Tell me what brings you in, and you can say all your stuff, and say what you say, like, oh, I'm cool, because everybody cool when it comes there, right? It's no big deal, but just listening, taking the time to talk to a professional who is trained to listen to the signs, because that's what anytime I hear that, I'm like, okay, right. Cool, that's it, just that.
I think one of the coolest things about therapy is that you learn that you had feelings that you did not have. And you learn about parts of yourself that you did not know were there. And you learn about experiences that you had forgotten or tried to wipe out of your mind, or you just aren't connected with. And it's in getting more in touch with how you actually feel, that how you feel actually starts to improve. And I know that sounds paradoxical, but I think that's...
paradoxical. We're going to start having, like, a multi-syllable, like, band.
For me. Just for me.
I don't think I do it. So I get it, paradoxical, but I do want to add to that.
Does.
I do want to add to that. The best thing about therapy is also like everything you said, but you're also getting the words for it. Like,
yes,
so it's not just about
yes.
emotions, but you're increasing the vocabulary for emotions. Because I for real think some people only the emotions they know: sad, angry, happy, like not and
right.
even happy. Like there's happy and there's ecstatic.
Right.
There's sad and there's depressed.
Right.
There is, there's just so just working through someone to be like, oh, that was a moment when I was sad. That was a moment when I was depressed. This
right.
is a moment when I was happy. This is a moment when I was just so ecstatic. I'm still feeling like the buzz from it, talking about it right now. Like you get the vocab from it. So okay,
right.
so that's one
but
thing.
No, but that's huge too, because you can't fix what you can't identify.
Yeah, most of us weren't taught that.
And you can't work through what you can't name. And therapy is about naming. It's about putting words to it. It's about getting more connected with what you actually kind of maybe have always like felt or kind of known,
mm-hmm.
but not fully known, not had the language for it, couldn't contextualize it with words. And so therapy does that for you. I think the warning, like looking at the warning signs is really important too. You had talked about losing pleasure or interest in things that you used to enjoy, and I think that that's something that can be really hard to notice at first. The example that you used was someone who's like really enjoyed playing basketball and then slowly but surely like stopped playing. They just didn't enjoy it as much. With age comes aching bones and muscles at times. But
yeah, all right, but
but you gotta you just be aware of that. Like if things that you used to really get amped for, start to kind of taper up, and you're not experiencing them in the similar ways, or the kind of enjoyment, that kind of spark from the endorphins just isn't doing it for you, that's a sign.
Yeah, and there's also like the whole, I hate this word, but the whole self-care aspect of it. So one of the things that I always hear, in addition to not getting pleasure from something, example basketball or exercise, is that you're also taking out a huge genetic or bio aspect of like what contributes to you feeling better, like exercise and endorphins. So paying attention to that. But that's also something that can make you feel better. And I'm not saying like you got to enroll in like CrossFit or whatever. Planet Fitness is pretty low though. You can get there for the low. like a 15-minute walk could really help you, or something like that. Like, or your diet definitely helps, because like putting crap in your body, it's not going to help you. Keeping
up with a good self-care regimen is really, really useful, and that includes diet and exercise. But also, we do know that not all prevention works, right? We do prevention because it's really helpful to do that on the front end. It's really helpful to prevent something from happening rather than trying to fix something or work through something that has already happened. So prevention is helpful, but we also know that sometimes prevention doesn't work. And sometimes, no matter how regular you are at yoga every Saturday or Sunday, or how often you go for a walk or hit the gym, that depression can still happen regardless of your exercise regimen. And so while prevention does help, also know when prevention is just not enough, and there are other things that you need to do in order to better take care of yourself and to work through some of those feelings of depression. I think trying to find other enjoyable or pleasurable activities can be helpful. There's a whole school of thought in psychology. Behavioral theory talks about not just depression being an addition of a poor mood, but also a lack of pleasure in one's life. And part of some brands of therapy, Raquel has talked about this, CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah, I think we need a whole session on also like the different kinds of therapy.
That would be good too.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's really good about CBT is that it really does the cognitive part we'll explain in a moment, but the behavioral part is about getting into a particular routine that helps you to schedule, lock in, and attend things that are designed to uplift your mood. It sounds very simplistic, but it's actually kind of easier said than done.
Yeah, any change, any growth is easier said than done. And it's going to take time, but I think it's also important to celebrate the victories when you do that. If you realize that every time you start to get down and stuff like that, you go in the house and you lay down and listen to depressing music, and that's one thing. That's your habit. That's your normal aspect of it. With a CBT thought process would be like, okay, you notice yourself about to start getting down, and normally you go in the house and you start feeling worse and you start feeling more depressed. So the minute you start feeling yourself get down, don't go in the house. Stop. That's where we're gonna cut off that trend right now. Go outside and go for a walk.
I agree.
And automatically, like, we're able to change that behavior. So if you notice, it's going to be a cycle. I feel sad, I stay in the house, I feel worse because I'm alone, then I start feeling worse and stuff like that. Identify what it is that happens when you are feeling down, when you are feeling sad, when you are in depressed mood. And if you do the same things, you do the same routines, identify the routine, change the routine. Because if you change your feelings, you change your thoughts, then you change your behaviors. Like, if you feel better, you're going to think better, you're going to do better. If you feel worse, you're going to think worse and do worse. So just changing one aspect of that, changing one behavior, changing one thought, changing one feeling will change how much better you feel about yourself.
Absolutely. So to expand more on just the cognitive aspect of it, another part of you had mentioned another part of depression is about like being distracted. And sometimes for people, when they're distracted, there are actually other thoughts that they're having in their mind. There's this ruminative process, like thinking over and over and over, going down the shame spiral, as I call it, of things that you feel like you should have done better in the past, things that you should do better in the future, things that you're just constantly like going over and over again. Oh, like I wasn't good enough at this, I wasn't good enough in that, worrying about this, worrying about that. And you can just get into this spiral that continues and continues and goes and goes and goes. And a lot of our thoughts, they come in our mind automatically. We're not always conscious of them. They have an impact.
Talks about automatic thoughts.
They do.
They do
right?
have an impact. And when you're talking about, you're like the shoulda, coulda, woulda. Do not should all over yourself.
This is it. Wait, let's not. It's not just like gloss over this. This is a big deal.
I know, but
the shoulds, right?
Yeah.
The shoulds. Like if you say the word should, then that could lead to a really critical thought. And those critical thoughts definitely impact our emotions, how we feel about ourselves.
Yeah, they would. It probably changes the whole trajectory.
Right. So one like phrase that in cognitive behavioral therapy is catch it, check it, change it. So catch that you're having the thought, because thoughts do happen automatically. If you find yourself in a space where you're just ruminating, thinking over and over and over again, you find yourself, kind of like murmuring under your breath about things that you feel like you should have done a little bit better. Just feeling really, really down on yourself, and your thoughts are in line with that. Catch your thoughts, check them by asking yourself, okay, like how completely truthful, how completely honest, how completely accurate, how completely helpful is this particular thought? Is there a more helpful and more truthful statement that I could have about this particular thing?
Yeah, like, so instead of saying like, oh, I did terrible at this, I'm a terrible person, you could say, I did not do the best at this. However, there are other things that I do well at, and this is an opportunity to learn from. There is no way that one thing is going to make you the worst person in the world. I did poorly at this, and I'm the worst person in the world. No, I did poorly at this, and now I can learn how to do better. And also in changing it, now I can learn from it and, go forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's not just about telling yourself really positive, uplifting things that aren't quite believable. We're not talking about just empty platitudes. We're talking about an honest conversation about oneself, about the pros and the cons, and in those new thoughts. After you've checked a bad thought, after you've caught a bad thought, you're checking it by asking yourself how useful or helpful it is, and how truthful and completely honest it is. Would that thought hold up in court? Then you want to change it. You want to change it by both. By making it a more truthful statement, by incorporating both the negative aspect, but also, if you can find it, a more positive aspect about who you are, what you've done, and what potential there is in the future. So these are just a couple of ideas that you can do to manage depression. I think a big one, which we obviously already mentioned, is coming to therapy.
Of course, we're always going to be advocates for therapy. I would also say another thing is to check your extremes. So the always and never. They're the only thing that's going to be an always for me right now is I'm always breathing. I'm always black, and I'm never, but like, check it when you say I always do this or I never do this. Like that. Check when you're doing your self-talk. Check your extremes. Yes. Like, because most of the time it's not like I always did this. Oh, I did this time, and I can.
Yes.
Go forward.
We all do have self-talk. We all talk to ourselves. And again, as Raquel and I were saying, a lot of those thoughts are automatic. They happen unconsciously. And part of the impact can be unconscious as well. Depression often is, you often feel the sadness and and the morbidity that comes with depression, but you're not always aware of the thoughts that can lead to it, and the other emotions that may be coupled with it. Mm-hmm. So again, these kind of exercises can help. Coming to therapy can help. We've mentioned on the show before being willing to consult with a psychiatrist. Real quickly, I'll say not everyone has a chemical imbalance. No. There's a very small number of people that actually have it. It's easier. Hear this. It's easier.
Everyone likes instant gratification.
If it was just a chemical imbalance. But there's actually, it's not a large number of people that have that, because sometimes life is just hard.
Yeah, it's harder to acknowledge the fact that like there are some things that I'm doing or not doing that are contributing to how I'm feeling.
And there's some certain experiences that I've had that lead me to feel the way that I do. So depression is not all in your head. It can absolutely be tied to the chemicals in your brain, but it's almost always tied to also experiences that you've had that have a real life impact. Because all humans feel things, all humans experience things that are tough.
Definitely. So we hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please subscribe. Also, please review us. You can review us on iTunes. You can also review us on our Facebook page. We also have a website, theblackunconscious.com. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. And we're anywhere you can find podcasts.
Absolutely. And stay tuned. We are going to do a part 2 on oppression and depression. We want to expand more upon how oppression can lead to depression, the Black experience as it ties to depression, and get into like different types of depression too. So we hope to share that with you guys at some point.
Yes. So thank you, everyone. And please remember to be kind to yourself and then, have a positive inner self voice.
Take care. Thanks for listening.